final panel of the day. Just so everyone is nice and relieved, we will make sure that this is wrapped up by 6, so you can all go and get your dinner, because that's the most important thing at this time of the day. But before that, let's go and have some fun. Let's go and have some great conversations with James and Paul about selling up a business and getting a little bit more of a perspective from people who've been there and done that, right? So James, do you want to just give me a little bit of your experience in terms of selling up?
Okay, considering we haven't got much time, I'll have to go so quick.
Go.
Yeah, so management buyout, created a company that we was born ready, then was EdgeCase, and then exited to wargaming.net in the end of 2018. That's the short version.
Excellent. And you used all of the proceeds to buy the marvelous things behind you. That's what I'm understanding here. Hell yes.
That's exactly correct.
Exactly. And if that's not an incentive to sell your business, I don't know what is. And Paul, can you just give us a bit of your experience as well?
Sure thing. Unfortunately, my model collection isn't quite as impressive as James's, but something to work on anyway. Yeah, so I founded Tag Games about 14 years ago, and around about 4 years ago, we spun a technology business called Chili Connect out of Tag, and raised some seed funding for Chili Connect in February 2019. And then we exited to Unity about 6 months after that. So quite different to Tag, which was organically grown over a very long period of time, has yet to exit. With Chili Connect, we had a very kind of clear objective in mind, which was to build it up and then to partner with a larger acquiring company in as short as time as possible. So yeah, two very contrasting experiences, but with Chili Connect, certainly we're very intentional in terms of what we were trying to do there, and thankfully it worked out very well.
Intriguing. And I think one of the things that we're going to dive straight into here is a little bit about the question of timing, because the timing has always got to be right for everything in life, but particularly when it comes to selling up a business. So I'm going to go and throw this one to you first, James. In terms of working out, what's the right time to sell? Is there any solid advice that you can give, or is it one of those things that you're really going to have to think about it intuitively?
Well, it's interesting because I've talked to some people who've, who are looking to exit or have exited, and think about my own experience. I mean, it varies so much. We had a journey that meant that there was just a really clear time that was going to be like, okay, now is the time that we need to start looking for somebody to buy. It's opportune. There's people out there who are interested in us and have actually mentioned it. For other people I've spoken to, they are just having too much fun to sell, and they just don't want to yet. And they've said, well, I could, but maybe I should just enjoy this for a little bit longer. I think to some extent, there is what's going on around, and also people approaching you. So actually, I think there's the approach almost tempts people. I think that actually pushes people into it, even if they weren't necessarily thinking about it. Obviously, there's also what your investors the deal you might have done with the investors, where you've said, look, we'll exit in 3 to 5 years, and they're starting to get like looking to see if that's gonna happen, right? So your shareholders may well start to give you a little nudge at some point as well. So there's that side of things. Depends. There is many factors into what's good timing, I would have said. What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, I agree. I think first of all, it's as you said, James. It's what are the expectations? It's it's generally a team. It's very rarely just an individual that controls a games business. So take into account what are the team objectives. If you're all having a great time, you're running a lifestyle business that's hugely profitable, you're taking out dividends, you're just living the dream, why would you exit? Unless someone makes you an offer that you just absolutely cannot refuse. So I think that's probably the first thing to take into consideration. But I think if you're in the place where the intention is very much that we're building this to sell at some point, because there are other things we want to do as a group, as a team, or because we want the experience of being part of a large organization, or our ambitions go beyond what we can actually do with the resources we have today, then it is really kind of about building the opportunity to exit. It's about intentionally, I guess it comes down to the strategy in your business, the decisions you make on a day-to-day basis, who you do business with, the types of deals you do, the way you market and promote yourselves. All of that ties back to the fact that we're just looking to make ourselves attractive, and attractive to probably potential acquirers that you've already targeted. So I know for us with Chili Connect, it was super easy because as we were in that startup phase, two of our closest rivals were acquired by Amazon and Microsoft, which meant that we were probably left with probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 obvious acquiring parties that we could really work towards. So we had laser focus in terms of how we built that business and how we, I guess, promoted ourselves as well, and the relationships that we built. And I think that worked very well. But I think ultimately, if you sit somewhere in between, then ultimately you're trying to create the most successful business, have as much fun as you possibly can, make some great games, and the opportunity will almost certainly arise. As I've been listening to the other speakers, what is really evident right now is that games are super hot from an investment point of view, from an exit point of view. This is probably the best time ever to be in games in terms of those opportunities. So a lot of companies that possibly weren't thinking about exiting or selling are probably getting offers right now that they can't refuse, and so they're asking that question: is now the right time? So for us with Chili Connect, we could certainly have taken on more funding. Our existing investors were 100% behind the business. We were really doing pretty well, certainly on track in terms of what we were trying to achieve. But for us, we felt that ultimately our ideal exit partner was going to be Unity. So when that offer came in, it just felt that was the right time. For us on a personal level and also as a business.
Yeah, because that's a really interesting point, because I know one of the questions that we were sort of floating around together as well was about, the right fit, the right buyer. How do you go about and find that? And we were talking about things, things like cultural fits and those kinds of backgrounds. So, when you were saying that Unity were the ideal buyer, why was that the case? And what do you think that tells us sort of more broadly about when you're looking to set up a business?
Yeah, I think cultural fit is very important. I think also strategic fit is also super important. So for us, looking at what Unity were doing in the industry, their ability to take what we were doing and to, I guess, put rocket fuel on it and take it to the next level. Unity's reach in terms of marketing and sales is way beyond anything we could have done as a small startup, even with another round of funding. So I think if we were in the position where our ambition was to be the best within the area that we were operating in, could we have done that on our own? Possibly not. What was the best way to do it? Who would be the ideal partner? And certainly Unity were very much at the top of that list. I think then it comes down to, culturally, can we work with the other team? Where are they based? For us, Unity are obviously based globally, but a lot of the main offices are in Europe and North America. Do we speak the same language? We had similar experiences. Where do we fit in terms of their strategic vision? Do they have a similar, or do they share the same strategic vision that we have? Do we see the industry in the same way? This is very important, because ultimately the journey doesn't end when you sell. It's really just another chapter of the journey, and you've got to continue to work with the acquiring partner, with the buyer after the sale, and hopefully towards common and aligned goals. So if you're just doing it for the money, things can unravel pretty quickly, I think, after the deal is done.
And I mean, I will definitely come back to that as well, Paul, because I think it's a really interesting point. But just very briefly talking about the money, in terms of talking about, the terms of the deal or the types of exits open and available to you, James, what's your kind of thinking, when you trying to give advice to businesses to sell up, what do they need to be thinking about in terms of getting those terms right? And what do they need to consider in terms of what their options are? Because there's not just one type of exit, right?
Well, it's really interesting. Actually, I was enjoying listening to the talks earlier, because actually it summarised a great deal of all the various options. Because I think a lot of people just assume it's just going to be, well, I'm just going to get a big wad of cash for my shares, and I'm going to run off and buy a helicopter or something like that. My helicopter was rather smaller than some other people's helicopters that they buy when they exit. But there are different shapes and sizes and different blends. And actually, some of the things that people were talking about here earlier, I must admit, until we really got into the deal proper, it was all wizardry and jargon, and I really didn't quite understand exactly what they were talking about. Even though, having run a business for a long time, there's new things to consider. So I think that I would definitely recommend anybody look back at some of the videos that, if you've joined later, watch those videos that were run earlier, and listen to what was said about the various shapes and sizes, certainly it's worth considering that you wouldn't, it doesn't necessarily is going to be a share sale. It's common as a share sale or share swap or a blend, but actually a lot of what's going on at the moment, I know from some companies and ourselves as well, you get people interested in buying the team, the assets, etc., and things like that. So actually you get a different shape of deal that is not always a share and share swap and so forth. So I would definitely do your research, but I wouldn't overthink that either. By the way, I wouldn't overthink what type of deal might it be. Head for, okay, we're going to do a deal with somebody, and it's going to have a value of this, and we're going to look for this kind of money for our company. Then I think the actual minutiae will just unravel, in front of you, and then you'll be like, oh, all right, I get it. I see what's likely to happen here.
Okay, so get that process going and
get the process
going.
I mean, one of the things on process going, I would get that process of starting to think that you are going to exit a long time in advance of when it's actually going to happen. I mean, I know things can happen really quickly these days, and people are saying, oh, well, somebody just made me an offer and we just heard a deal was only 6 weeks. But, as somebody who was doing the biz dev for the company, I mean, we were thinking 18 months-ish in advance of when it actually finally, the paperwork's done, maybe even 2 years of courting and chatting and thinking and discussing and debating and just gradually working towards that moment. But again, some people, it's just like they just get swooped on by lawyers and bought up. So we'll see.
And then away you go. But in terms of, I'm going to jump back now to Paul and about that point about thinking about the after, or at least thinking about sort of the ongoing nature of it, because let's say you get the deal, it's all done, things carry on, right? The team is still there, quite possibly you're probably still there doing something. So what do you need to be thinking about in terms of setting up your business from that perspective as well? Because I assume that it's one of those things that you could very easily end up in a minefield if you're not careful, right?
Yeah, it is. It's very difficult. I think when you're starting out, you have to consider, the nuances of, that deal and the negotiation is almost impossible. But I would say, James's illustration there of it being a courtship is spot on. The courtship period can last years potentially, and that's about due diligence and getting to know each other from both parties. That sense of like, okay, this is something permanent that we're getting into. It's serious. There's certain expectations from both sides that need to be met. I think once the deal is done, and you need to know what you're getting into, certainly. So I think that the sooner you start thinking about this, the better. I think not just from a company perspective, but also from a personal perspective, things are going to change for you personally. If you're head of a game studio, or you're in the senior management in a game studio, and you're acquired, then things will be different. Financially, you might suddenly go from a position where things are a bit of a struggle to being multimillionaires overnight. What does that look like? Do you still have the same motivation? What's your mental health like at that point in time? Thinking about how you're going to cope with that change. What's your role going to be? You're used to leading and getting your own way and determining the company strategy and how you plan and how you execute. All of a sudden, you have a boss. You might have numerous bosses. You might be under a number of different layers of management. How's that going to be? What's your role? Because it's clearly going to change. Once you're part of a probably larger organization, are you going to be, allowed to continue in an autonomous fashion? Maybe you are, but maybe you're only going to have 12 months or 18 months of that until you're going to be integrated into the larger business. So there's a lot of questions. So I think you're having. Number one for me certainly is ensure that you are attractive and don't just take the first offer that comes along. And again, it's the courtship thing. Just because the first person shows interest, don't just jump into it because they are the first person to show interest or the first company to show interest. Think about what you want out of it, and ultimately you want to be in a position where there's a bit of competition. There are 2 or 3 interested parties. You can play them off each other to get a better valuation, or you can play them off each other to get better terms. You need to be in a position, even up until the day of signing, to be able to walk away. It's absolutely vital that you maintain some power and control up until that final point. But then, once you're into it, you really want that to be as smooth a transition as possible. You want to be, and this talks back to the question of culture. You want to feel at home on day one. So knowing your place, knowing that there's a plan in place that you've talked through even ahead of the acquisition, where the company is going to sit in terms of the organizational structure of the acquiring party, what your role is going to be, what's expected of you, what are the commercial targets, what are the creative or other targets that you might have. I think that dialogue is super important. That's why I would always be a bit concerned about a deal that's done in a matter of weeks rather than a matter of months or years. Is that, do you really have time to do that in-depth exploration of these smaller nuances? So I think that the sooner you start thinking deeply about this, the better prepared I think you'll be for what happens after the deal's done, because it really is the start of a new chapter, and hopefully it's a positive chapter rather than one that's negative.
Certainly,
one thing I'd say about, sorry George, one thing I'd say about preparing is actually, once you know your strategy and you've sort of worked out, and you maybe pivoted a couple of times, or you've worked out where you sit in the market, actually do create a list of potential exits. I mean, it sounds, Paul sounds like he had his list. Create your list, because actually part of that courtship means that you know who you should potentially be courting. Right? It's wandering around just talking to everybody about everything is not going to happen, and to be time consuming and vague and so on. But if you know that you're a specialist in X, and you know that there are specialists in X out there who are much bigger and maybe purchasers, then you know who to sit and chat with at the bar, and who to go and meet, and who to tell regularly about your progress. So I think that's one of the things, is just, without, you're not selling yourself immediately, but you're just updating people about your progress on a regular basis. We did this, we did that, this is where we're at. Just meeting up, just saying hello, and just doing that over a long period of time with the people who are on your shortlist. And that means that you're strategically aligned, which is very, very important, because that's, that, as well as we talked about culture and values, that strategic fit is why they will care, why you're of interest.
Definitely. No, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to round this off, because we have run out of time. I know.